So good morning again, everyone. Wait one second. I'm having a little technical issues here. Here we go. All right. So this morning, my topic is the love of fate. Expression I had never heard. Maybe you have heard. But one of the things I have enjoyed doing over the course of my practice and interest in Buddhism, starting in the early 90s, is to sort of look at the ways in which Buddhist teachings and other philosophies and faith traditions, wisdom traditions overlap, where they have sort of common universal wisdom, if you will. And so with that in mind, the last couple of years I've been delving into some Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, those folks were writing in the first century or earlier, and really am struck, if any of you looked at that stuff, with the similarities between Stoicism and Buddhism. And then that led me sort of going down the rabbit hole to Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century German philosopher, about whom I was no expert and really didn't know much. But what jumped out in looking at that was what his formula for what he calls human greatness. And the term is amor fati. It's Latin, and it means a love of fate. And the quote from Nietzsche is, quote, "That one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backwards, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it." So you'll hear in that the sort of Buddhist notion of acceptance. And he really emphasized that as a transformative concept, and the notion that greatness in life arises not only when we accept the inevitability of existence, but when we embrace it in all its facets fully and joyously. And there you'll hear the echo of the Buddha saying we have to welcome all experience. Everything that happens in our lives, including suffering and loss, is either good or at the very least necessary. And as I say, I love this concept. It immediately jumped out at me because it aligns so well with the Dharma. And Nietzsche articulated this is a state of being where we desire nothing to be different. Nothing to be different. Not the past, not the present, not even the future. In other words, acceptance, acceptance, acceptance. And he goes on to say that instead of merely enduring or tolerating the challenges and trials of life, that we should wholeheartedly affirm every moment, every event, every circumstances as not only indispensable, but meaningful. Now think about it. That's a pretty radical, as I think the Buddhist teaching on acceptance is radical, a pretty radical concept. And this kind of notion of what I would call radical acceptance, it's not about resignation, it's not about throwing in the towel, passive submission, but it is a call for a courageous love of life as it is, unadorned, unaltered, unchanged. So his notion of amor fati resonates deeply, I think, with the Buddhist teachings, especially the Buddha's teachings on acceptance. And while it's grounded, Nietzsche's approach is grounded in this sort of existential affirmation of individuality and overcoming individual challenges. I think Buddhism does take it a little further and offers an additional emphasis on the sort of not self notion, which Nietzsche doesn't talk about, and the interconnectedness of all things. So I think that the Buddha took it a little further. But by examining Nietzsche's concept through the lens of Buddhist wisdom, we see how both traditions converge in their shared commitment to embracing life fully. And that's what I love about it. You know, they're offering complementary insights, overlapping insights into the art of letting go, And at the time, at least in the West, where in the 19th century when Buddhism wasn't well known, this was really a revolutionary stance, his writings. I have no knowledge of whether he had heard of the Buddha or knew anything about it. Maybe he came up with this on his own. But But he rejects the human tendency, our tendency to dwell on regret, to wish for different outcomes, or to hope for a reality other than the one that exists. And I'm sure that will have a familiar ring to you, to not dwell on regret, not to wish for different outcomes or hope for a reality other than the one that exists. And for him, for Nietzsche, such attitudes, if we don't engage with it, diminish life and alienate us from what he feels is our own power in this life. He believed that true greatness arises when we affirm life in its entirety, all the pleasure, all the pain, all the triumphs, all the tragedies. And that couldn't be more Dharma-like. And this requires more than, as I said, a mere sort of stoic, white-knuckle endurance of misfortune or suppressing one's dissatisfaction. It really asks us to actively love all things, the necessity of things, a celebration of life that unfolds exactly as it does, even though we don't always welcome it, seek it, like it, or whatever. And this concept is intertwined with Nietzsche's concept of what he calls eternal recurrence, which is this idea that one imagines living one's life exactly as it has unfolded in the past. Now think about that. I mean, it says we celebrate everything that has happened to us to date, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, down to the smallest detail. You know, we can accept and love our life so completely, and this really jumped out at me, that we would joyfully live it again without change. I mean, that requires such an openness, such a attitude of acceptance that it really is pretty stunning. You know, because he's asking us to joyfully live it again without wishing a single moment be altered. And this acceptance without resentment or resistance is the ultimate, in his view, expression of human greatness. It centers on affirming life's necessity, and we're not unlike Buddhism, which offers the perspective through the Four Noble Truths and the practice of mindfulness. You know, this idea from the Buddha that we understand dukkha arises from craving or attachment, our desire for life to be different than what it is. And Nietzsche's admonition to us goes right to the heart of that we let go of the wish for life to be different than what it is. The Buddha taught that liberation comes from not changing external circumstances, practically because we have no control over it, but from transforming our relationship to external circumstances. Which again means accepting life as it is without clinging to pleasure or resisting pain. And in this sense, the Buddhist path parallels the teaching that Nietzsche offers. Both call for a profound acceptance of life's unfolding, whatever it brings, whatever it brings. Now, Nietzsche emphasizes the affirmation of life's necessity, and the Buddha goes further by saying that our suffering, which he still asks us to accept if we can't let go of it, it comes from mistaking impermanence for permanence. That's one of the things we have to let go of. And this allows us to not only accept, but transcend life's inevitable up and downs. We just ride the waves. We just don't get stuck or bogged down. And by seeing through the illusion of permanence, by seeing the transient nature of all things, we naturally cultivate equanimity, this deep peace that arises when we stop resisting what is, when we stop resisting reality. The peace, the freedom that the Buddha promised comes from stop resisting the reality of our lives. So we reject resentment, we reject escapism, we face life's challenges with courage and openness, because both of these thinkers advocate a shift in perspective that transforms suffering, turns suffering into a source of growth and meaning. Every experience is a teacher. You know, It's the realization, as the Buddha taught, of the interconnection and impermanent nature of all things. And every time we encounter that and bump up against it, and it feels unpleasant, it's a teachable moment. Oh, here is impermanence again. Oh, here's my interconnection to everything again. Okay. Now, all that said, it's not to suggest there are not tensions between these two schools of thought rather. Nietzsche celebrates our power to shape our destiny and embrace our own unique path. He talked about Übermensch, that translates as overman, this figure who transcends conventional morality and creates new values. Whereas the Buddha talks about the dissolution, the reduction of the ego, the abandonment of selfish ambition. Buddhism sees liberation in letting go of this sense of a fixed self altogether. Okay. But both paths require this fearless engagement with life as it is. We don't retreat into denial. We don't retreat into regret, and we don't retreat into despair. We welcome all experience. That is a tall order, but the Buddha promised us that there's freedom in doing that. This acceptance offers us a roadmap, a guidance for navigating life's challenges, navigating life's uncertainties. Both of these philosophies teach us to embrace reality without resistance, to find meaning in the present moment, and to transform suffering into a source of strength. It makes us more resilient. It makes us stronger. We learn from it. In a society that encourages dissatisfaction, encourages an emphasis on what's lacking in our lives, and that we try to fix it through consumerism. We try to deny it through social comparison or the endless pursuit of perfection. That is all a fool's errand. Peace and fulfillment does not come from changing the world around us, but from changing our perspective on the world around us. It doesn't mean passivity or resignation, as I said. Instead, it means an active engagement with life, a willingness, not just, a sort of got to do it, but an open willingness to face challenges and hardships with open arms. The Buddha never asked us to, engage in escapism or indifference. He says, see it clearly, act wisely, cultivate compassion for ourselves and others in the face of suffering. True greatness lies not in controlling our fate, which we can't do anyway, even though we try, but in loving our fate just as it is. So here again, Nietzsche's notion is a powerful call to embrace life fully, to love not only the good and the pleasant and the joyful, but also the difficult and painful aspects of resistance. Think about that. When we drop the rope on fighting with difficult and painful experiences, we just relax into it. We don't like it, but we're not in a wrestling match with it. We're not fighting it. We're not expending all this energy trying to control it. So when viewed through a Buddhist lens, this love of fate that Nietzsche talks about really is a profound practice of mindfulness and compassion, an invitation to embrace life's impermanence and all that it comes with it. Okay. To transcend resentment, transcend regret, to find beauty and meaning in every moment, no matter how challenging. Tall order, tall order. To love fate, to use the translated form of Nietzsche's teaching, is to love life, and to love life is to awaken to the truth of life, which is accept things as they are. In this awakening, we discover that there is nothing to change, nothing to resist, and nothing to fear. Boy, if that's not a radical notion. Nothing to change, nothing to resist, and nothing to fear. Only the boundless freedom of embracing what is. So those are some thoughts today on how Friedrich Nietzsche lines up a little bit with the Buddha. Let's